Hi, just flip on. It feels like a series now of culture videos because I've had so much more feedback since the last one. So, in the last video, I talked about this idea of hyper compliance cultures and this idea of being overmanaged and under-led. This idea that you have so many rules, so much compliance. There's no judgment being given to people. You have to just follow the rules, and it gets very hierarchical, very bureaucratic, and quite sort of it's sort of very sort of static. It's sort of rigid. And those sort of organisations, that sort of rigidity in terms of processes, it gives you a level of codified strength. You can feel somehow, I've got a process for everything. Somehow we're stronger. But the reality is, it's not strength. It's just very brittle. And as soon as you get any kind of changes in the environment or the customer, or if there's any sort of dynamic changes whatsoever, those processes start to sort of creak. So I always think it's very important to have a light process, sort of high skill around judgment making generally. But I got a lot of feedback on this. So people give examples of like operating discipline, which is something I think a little bit different. So operating discipline is saying, okay, when you run things in organizations, whether it's payroll or whether you're operating a vehicle and you're driving around the streets, or you're preparing a meal in a kitchen as a chef, there's a professional trained right way to do things. You might argue that as a must. There's probably a must for how you hold a knife to chop a carrot, and there's probably a must in terms of how you should be driving a sort of a delivery vehicle, or you're operating a piece of machinery. So I think those operating disciplines are definitely are a form of must, but it's about the discipline you need to do to run that in the most efficient way, in the most predictable way sometimes, because if you're working together, imagine a kitchen, you work in a predictable way so that you can all work in concert. So I think operating discipline is by definition a sort of a codified strength, but I don't see it as a sort of one of these musts where it's like a sort of a heavy process. And I was trying to think of an example where this would play out. And the best example I can give is as a consumer, for example, if I'm going to a restaurant, and this has happened to me a few times. So I go to a restaurant, let's say I'm in a hurry. So I sit myself down and I go to the counter, and the person greets me, asks for a table. They take me to the table and they sit me down. And as soon as they sit me down, I say, look, I'm absolutely famished. Can I have a Diet Coke and a club sandwich? And I've been there before, and I know that's what they do. And what will happen is, inevitably, the person will say, well, actually, I'm just the person who takes you from the entrance to your seat. Your server will be with you in a minute. And then, inevitably 4 or 5 minutes later, someone will turn up, and they might put down a napkin, and they might bring you a glass of water. And you say, I'm absolutely famished. I'd like a club sandwich and a Diet Coke. Well, actually, I'm just doing this. Your server will be along shortly. And then inevitably, someone will come along a bit later, and they'll introduce themselves, and they'll tell me about the specials, and I'll sit quietly and patiently listen to them. And they'll finish, and I'll say, okay, I'd like to order now then, please. And you make your order. Now, there's clearly an operating discipline. There's a series of musts and shoulds, and there's a series of things that they're told and they're trained. This is how we greet our customers. This is how we seat them. But as a customer, I might just want to make an order really quickly and get out of there. And that's suddenly where the sort of the customer requirements is banging up against rigid process. Especially if they say, look, I can't take your order. It's not my job. The person's coming soon. So that's an example for me where you have the operating discipline, but it doesn't always meet with the customer requirements. Now, 9 times out of 10, or maybe even 99 times out of 100, that's probably the best practice way. But would it be nice if the person who seats you initially, when you say, look, I'm absolutely starving and I need a drink right now, they say, sure, sir, what would you like? Right. And they've got the permission, they've got the empowerment to just create that exceptional customer experience. And wouldn't that be nice if that was to happen? If that did happen, how much happier would you be as a customer? Another example, and this has happened to me as well, is you get your menu and you say, okay, I want to. There's something on the menu you like, but you don't quite like something in it. So, for example, I was being a vegetarian for a while. there was a sandwich and I didn't want the turkey. And on the menu, there's an option to add in turkey for things, and there's an option to add in halloumi for things. And halloumi is cheaper than turkey. So I said, okay, I'd like to order this, but I want to take the turkey out and I want to put the halloumi in. And I don't mind paying extra, but actually it looks like it's probably cheaper on the menu. And the look of sort of often horror on the face of the server to say, oh, you want to go off menu, and 9 times out of 10, they'll come back and tell you how it's completely impossible to do that. And then it's this awkward moment where you sort of go, well, okay, well, I'll order it and I'll just take the turkey out and I'll put it on the side. So again, you'll have processes in place. They'll have these musts that are there, and it's there to drive operating discipline and efficiencies and all those really good things. But if that stops you having a great customer experience, well, what was the point in the first place? Surely the whole point of these processes is to drive, happy customers. So I think organisations, if they were really to explore must, should, may, they would find many places in an organisation where they could remove some of the sanctions and the control. They could give greater empowerment. They could focus on maybe the big picture, which is strategically what are we trying to do here, and allow people to make more decisions themselves. Now, clearly there's a limit to that, and we're not saying people can then just create their own menus in restaurants. But my sense is that if you want to create a competitive advantage in your company, you want to move faster with less bureaucracy and be more customer focused, examining your must, should, mays as a culture wouldn't be a bad place to start. So I hope that helps, and I'm sure now I'm going to get even more questions coming back on this. So thank you very much.